Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir, then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir, then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please your Father would work it out. Oh, let
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by my friend, scholar, philosopher, professor, and clergyman, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. How are you doing, sir?
Good. You forgot time traveler.
I did forget time traveler. Where are you coming from this point in the timeline?
It's all messed up. I don't actually know. It's I've jumped time zones so much that, by the way, did we get to talk about quantum leap ever?
I don't know if we've ever talked about quantum physics.
No, the 90s show, Quantum Leap.
Oh, no, we haven't. Oh, no.
Yeah, it just dawned on me. I was watching like a clip the other day, and I realized this guy's not even a scientist. He's on a psychedelic trip.
Yeah.
Because it talks about his buddy that nobody can see and
Yep.
he's jumping into different people's bodies. I'm like, come on.
I remember
Like,
that
obviously,
show.
this is not
It was
real.
very
This,
trippy. Yeah, that was something you'd sit around with your pals and probably get a little bit too inebriated and sit and watch. Like, whoa, bro!
yeah,
Quantum entanglement, man.
yeah. That was before quantum entanglement was cool.
Well, how are things
Quantum,
in your parts of Montana, man? I'm excited to
great.
get
Yeah,
up there for Montanica in June, man.
absolutely. I hope everybody else is getting excited about it too.
They should be. I know I'm stoked. I know Father Turbo is stoked. I'm sure
Yep.
you're stoked. For those of you who haven't got your tickets, go get your tickets and join us. I'm telling you, you're not gonna miss you're not gonna feel like it was a waste, and you will feel like you missed out. And as we were saying, who knows what 2024 is gonna look like. A lot of people are speculating another lockdown may be coming to try to clinch down on the mail-in ballots for the 2024 election. Who knows? Maybe this is the last conference you can attend. Who knows?
Absolutely. I mean, remember how crazy it got in 2020. It's going to
Yeah.
be worse. It's only gotten worse. And, I don't mean that in the sense of like, I don't have any fear about it, but like,
Right.
obviously anticipation for something that's going to be a lot crazier. Tensions politically are, it's, what's the phrase that, the idiom, past the tipping point, or
Definitely
the point of no return, or what's the other one, the
broke the
idiom that
threshold for sure.
the wave has crashed. What's that one? That idiom?
I don't
There's
know.
another
Yeah,
one.
I remember the first two.
We are at that point, and this could be the last.
Anton says, "Shut your mouth, lockdown, schmackdown."
Yeah. This could be the last
We love you,
conference.
Anton One,
Crispy.
Crispy Johnson.
Yep. You'll be eating
Exactly.
bugs in a pod, and you'll be
Exactly. I
thinking,
saw one woman recently bragging about how she had a newborn baby and she was feeding it crickets for protein. She literally had a bag of crickets. It looked like did you see the Dyer skit on Tucker right before he got canceled as Klaus? She literally had a bag of his crickets, Klaus's crickets, and she was giving it to a little baby. It was disgusting. But that's kind of even going to tie into a little bit what we talk about today and the sort of the
what if
historical
you
error of
next
humanism.
year are living in a pod eating bugs, and all you can think about is, only if I had bought tickets to Montana, my last fellowship, my last communal thing before they put me in the pod.
Exactly. My last opportunity to see my friends.
And you know what? It is very St. Paul, redeem the time. I mean, I know what's going on in a lot of your minds is like, oh, I don't have the money to do it this year, or I don't have the you make it work. If you really want to be here, you'll be here. That's what, and it's going to be worth it. You're not going to regret it. Redeem the time. Take advantage of this opportunity.
Yeah. So is early bird still going on? Can people still get it?
So what I did, I extended that one more week. So I think it's listed on the site still is. It ended the 21st. But for all of you, just to be charitable, push it out one more week. So tomorrow's the last day that you can get the early bird tickets at $140, and then it jumps up to the regular price at $170, which is still a heck of a deal, right? Like I said, I did some polling and research. Father Peter Hears' conference at the Antiochian Village last year, for 8 meals, 3 days of speakers, was I think I read it was either $240 or $260. And nobody regretted that, paying that and stuff like that. So I knew, I'm like, $140 for a discount, $170, even better.
Yep.
And that's not to diss his conference or anything like that. It's just I'm I'm trying to make it easier for you to get up here and get more bang for your buck.
Right. Um, I wanted to also mention to people, I have a partnership now with a Orthodox company here in Ohio in the Midwest called Orthodox Depot. And so use promo code COTEL. You can get they got prayer books, they got ortho crosses for chrismation, they got all types of stuff. If you're in the marketplace for some Orthodox memorabilia, some could be whatever you're looking for, again, necklaces, stuff like that, they got all that. Go check out orthodoxdepot.com and get 10% off.
Hey, Patrick, can you do me a favor with that?
What's up?
Excuse me, I've got this frog in my throat. Yesterday, Patristic Faith, we put up, we've been thinking about this for a while, but we actually launched it yesterday. It's an Orthodox business directory.
I saw that. I
And
shared it on Twitter. That's such a genius idea.
so that keeps money within. That doesn't mean you have to have an Orthodox company. The one that you mentioned is actually an Orthodox company.
Right.
But the idea is if you're Orthodox and you're a business owner or service provider, we want you to go on to Patristic Faith and actually upload your information, your business information into that. So there's a directory for people, instead of outsourcing our income and money to secular and non-Orthodox, we want to support our brothers and sisters. And so we want to build a strong Orthodox community and economy. And I thought that's an excellent way to do that. So use that company, get them to put that up on there too. And if any of you have your own or know people that have an Orthodox business or service provider, go on to Patristic Faith there and upload your information into the directory. It has to be obviously pre-approved before it immediately goes up. Like, you don't just submit, otherwise we're going to get crazy. Everybody, any crazy person could put something up on Patristic Faith. So don't be shocked if it's like, well, I put it in, it didn't come up right away. It's like, it's backstage being reviewed, and it'll be up shortly.
No, but I think that's a great idea. Whether you're a plumber, whether you're a construction worker, whether you sell t-shirts, whatever the heck you do, if you're Orthodox and you're part of our community, if we could get a catalog full of people doing different, whatever their business is, whatever they do, and then you can look up and say, oh, well, this person's in Maryland too. I'm in Maryland. I'll have to reach out to them. I've been needing my roof done. And then we can keep supporting our brothers and sisters. And then, you know, it's a great way to keep money inside of our community. We talk about building communities. Well, I think this is a great idea just for commerce and circulating money and helping each other out. So I think it's a great idea. I think it's a fabulous idea, and I fully support it. In regards to our topic today, this is something that I've been wanting to talk to you about. We're continuing our series on the good, the bad, and the ugly, which, again, we did one on Aristotle, and we've done one on metaphysics, and we have talked about, I think we did another one. I'm not sure. I know those two have been popular philosophy streams. We did a full like 3.5 hours on metaphysics. But what I wanted to talk with you about today is humanism. My conversation with Father Peter Heers on transhumanism talked about post-humanism, which is a really crucial philosophical dimension to transhumanists and futurists, what they're called, futurist philosophers. Well, you can't really understand post-humanism without first understanding humanism. And I just did a big sponsored stream on Rosicrucianism, and Rosicrucianism occupies this space right before the Enlightenment. So it's between the Italian Renaissance, where we're going to see humanism really develop from, but it's before the Enlightenment, where all the magic and all the spirituality and all the alchemy gets yanked out of the humanist movement. After the Enlightenment, it's really pure rationality and science and secularism. But before the Enlightenment, we see humanists occupying Hermeticism and alchemy, and that's where Rosicrucianism is a huge role. So today we're going to be really focusing on what is philosophical humanism. And to start, I was going to let you sort of open up. How would you begin to open a student's understanding of what exactly humanism is, because it's going to touch on politics, it's going to touch on
Yeah.
philosophy, it's going to touch on ethics and morality, it's going to touch on art movements, it's going to touch on, again, it transpires the Renaissance to the Enlightenment into humanist organizations in the 21st century. So open up for us, what exactly is humanism?
So I think with a lot of things, a lot of different kind of subject matters like epistemology or something like that, it almost just it has to do with both reorientation and starting points. So if you look, and it's really hard to kind of divide up periods of time and know exactly like where do we cut it off, or like and say um, this is modernity, this is post-modernity, this is antiquity. I call it the boundary problem.
Yeah.
And you got to do your best, right, with that. It's not going to be perfect because there's kind of a continuum, right, and bleed over. But one thing that we try to do in terms of categorizing that is to notice in various periods of time reorientations, shifts in the way that people think about stuff, or even a replacement of certain kind of principles and foundations. And you can see this whether it's political, epistemological, in terms of science and stuff like that. And so I think it's a good place to start as far as humanism, that there's a shift, a reorientation, a different way of looking at things,
Right.
a different starting point from antiquity. Now, Dante Germino, interesting enough, says there's 3 different types of humanism. He says there's theocentric humanism. Okay, so and that's obviously not modern.
Right.
Then there's anthropocentric humanism, and then messianic humanism. And he's going to use these kind of frameworks. So you could say we're always in a humanism or something like that. But it's what is our ground for that? How do we explain? In other words, how do we explain the human being or the world and God? Is it what's our starting point? What's our focus? And so if I start with theocentric humanism, he says what he means by that is the political tradition that extends from Plato, and this is a really cool phrase, where God is the measure of all things.
Right.
And Aristotle through Stoicism and Christianity. So he, as far as the boundary, he puts that's a theocentric humanism. Why? Because in all of those traditions of antiquity, they're in agreement that the divine ground of being is the source and order for men. So what we're really trying to do is, again, explain man in his relation to the world. For the man of antiquity, it's a theocentric humanism. God is the ground, the unconditioned grounds of being and the order of men and societies, and that the good man is one whose soul's open to the therapia of acquiring the virtues and being attuned with that transcendent source. And the highest good is the principle, right? The sunum bonum.
Right.
It's not world dominion. And you know that I've written about this in terms of the dangers of modernity and technology, where, and I reference a lot of Vogelin's stuff.
Yep. I got his right over there.
That this kind of reorientation and a rejection of the theocentric kind of humanism, really the death of God, the abolition of God in Christianity, then gets, everything kind of plays out in terms of the loss of, as Nietzsche says, objective standard in which man to account for that such a awesome and terrible deed becomes the standard. Right. The Pythagorean dictum. Now it's not theocentric, it is now man is the measure of all things, that which is and that which is not. And that's why you get these emphasis on totalitarianism and political power, world dominion, And I talk about that in terms of the neo-Gnosticism. And stop me at any time, and I'll move into if I outline correctly for you what theocentric humanism is. So that's in terms of righteousness and justice. And I just had a conversation with a dear Orthodox philosophy professor friend of mine, and we were talking about, and it's going to relate to exactly what we're talking about, these notions of intersectionality, right, that we hear all the time, justice and equity. I've always, what is it, the diversity, inclusion, and equity? I call it the DIE program.
Yeah.
We see it in all our colleges, right? I reject it because those terms are secular humanist terms that don't mean the same thing as, in other words, we can never have true equality, justice, righteousness, virtue apart from the Christian paradigm, apart from
Right.
that theocentric humanism.
Right. And so in regards to, and that's one of the points that I had to open up with humanism, and some people point, where does humanism begin? Some people point to Petrarch. Some people point to, again, the Italian Renaissance, generally speaking. But what it is, I argue, is the replacement of Christ with man as the theanthropic principle, as you're talking about. And so what is the measure of all things? Well, for 1,000 years, for Byzantium, which didn't have the same humanist influences that were arising in the West, it was Christ. But once in the West, once the Renaissance gets going and they start pulling again their classicist yearnings of looking at, well, if something's older, it must be better. Looking back to Cicero, looking back to Latin, and then focusing on these classical educations, focusing on reason, and reinterpreting what man is outside of its relationship and his relationship with God. And so humanism was this movement then that got going. It's a new envisioning of man, no longer in tandem or in relationship to Christ, which was true for both Western and Eastern empires, if you will, the Holy Roman or the Byzantine, the Byzantine Empire. But it's now Christ, not so much. It's more about new conceptions of man. And that's why when we look at the Council of Florence and all these texts being brought into and translated into Latin, we see magic, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, all these things get brought together with humanism as a way in which now man can explore his capabilities to dominate, to control, to advance his power on nature itself. And so humanism then, to first, like, why is it different from the previous sector? It really has to do with its relationship, the understanding of man's relationship to God, and displacing God and elevating man and his reason to the nth degree. Now, once we get to the Enlightenment, now we're going to do away with all the magic. Before the Enlightenment, humanism is tied to alchemy. It's tied to magic and Hermeticism and theurgy and Neoplatonism and Kabbalah. And so for everybody then just listening, this is the transition. The transition is the way that man is viewed, and that then man becomes the measure of all things. That's why I use the Vitruvian man as the thumbnail for this video, because it's indicative of the humanist impulse that man is now the measure of the universe, not the God man, Christ. Because Christ brought, it's like they had the God man, but then they do away with God and they just kept themselves.
And it's not just marked by, it has to be wider spread than just somebody who proposed this idea. There's something happening, kind of the ethos and the zeitgeist, right? The spirit of the time. Because the first person to actually propose the idea of man as the measure of all things is Protagoras, who's an ancient.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still within the social, political, and historical context of he may be saying that, but it's still a society that's theocentric humanism. So, but he's a sophist. That idea, though, if it's to take hold, that seed would transform society into a secular anthropocentric humanism. And
Right.
so Dante Germino says that typical proponents, anthropocentric humanism views man's needs and aspirations in the world as primary for any political inquiry. So you see the reorientation?
Yep.
And we know this is how it's demonic too. Every sin and every bad movement and every fall happens from what? Whether it's St. Peter on the water, casting his eyes away from Christ and looking and having fear, or Lucifer himself, whose eyes were cast upon the Holy Trinity and then looks, all you have to do is look away from the
Right.
standard. And
Right.
he looks at himself and then begins and
The
so
new
this is,
standard. Yep.
yeah, this is what anthropocentric humanism or the secular humanism begins to do. It begins to look away as, like you said, the theanthropos is the center and looks at oneself as, well, I'm the most important. And obviously typical proponents of this, and now you're starting to get the period, right? Something's changing, is Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, and those anthropocentric humanists seldom explicitly reject. Notice what's happening. They're not rejecting the theocentric writers, but their orientation's changing, right?
Right. Because many of
Their
them would
key
have, like a Francis Bacon, would have said that they were Christian, but at the same time, they're writing books like right here, The New Atlantis, which is all about a utopian, scientifically governed, earthly utopia. It's millenarian.
Yes.
It's not apocalyptic, and that is going to be ruled. He's pretty explicit by Rosicrucians, and so it's
And this
like,
is where you get modern classical liberalism,
right,
is right out of that.
right,
And well, and then what do you get from that? A stress on human rights.
exactly. That's well, eventually I was going to go there. Is democracy becomes the political orientation of the humanist movement once we get post the Enlightenment.
Individual liberty, autonomy. Because I was just thinking about you. We have to understand where we are in a postmodern society and what's going on politically and philosophically and morally and all these different things. And you have to root it. We're in the afterbirth of this modern project, right?
Right.
And so we have stuff going on. What do you hear? My rights. I just heard on TV, like there's commercials, even for news, where we cover women's reproductive rights. I'm like, what? Reproductive rights? And scholars and colleagues that I work with are they're upfront about reject rights language.
Mm-hmm.
It's nonsense. And I was thinking about, all these political debates.
Because who gives the rights?
Yeah, exactly.
Man.
And the other thing too is that, we have issues going on right now in Montana that I told you about. We had an insurrection and stuff like this. And there's people talking about, censorship and freedom. I should be free to do whatever I want. And why? Like, what's the purpose of law? So you can be free to do whatever you like. Why is that a good thing?
Right.
I mean, I thought it was in terms of law was to promote, and here's the theocentric humanism. Law was to promote the virtue of a citizen, not to just be, and you've talked about boundary disillusions, where it's like, it's absolute autonomy. And now it's satanic and Luciferian.
Right.
You'd like do absolute autonomy and freedom. Like, that's insane to me, right? But that is rooted in secular humanism. And then what's really interesting, he goes on to make a third category, messianic humanism. That let's see, what does he say? Messianic humanism is a strand of political thought which seeks to transform the quality of man's experience. Now, Patrick, you already talked about this, right?
Right.
And he's going to set this up, and so is Vogelin, to talk about this kind of utopianism of Marx, Comte,
Yeah, so I was going to say
Saint-Simon.
Marx is a perfect example of that sort of messianic, humanistic, Hegelian framework, materialist framework that is leading towards what they believe to be another utopia. For Francis
Yeah,
Bacon is before, Marx is after. And so you see the displacement of God totally, where at least with Francis Bacon, he had a reference to God. Now, again, they're almost deists, and that's where deism gets going. Deism can't get going without humanism, because humanism elevates man to the status that he's going to finish creation. He's going to finish that which God created, because now he is the measure of all things. God's just the
that's the
clockmaker.
neo-Gnosticism, yeah.
Yeah,
Because the Gnostics is not satisfied with the order of being. But he doesn't say it's my fault, right? Like we would as a Christian. Well, it's my fault the world's messed up because of sin.
right.
Sin came in and man disordered nature. For the Gnostic, no, it's the Creator's fault, right? And
Right.
salvation doesn't lie in death. And I had this crazy dream about the heroine of Hades last night, where I was explaining to this conference like how amazing. I'm like, salvation is through death, and the grace that's in that overturns the grave and brings about eternal life. For the Gnostic, it's refocus it, and here's the on me. It's not going to be the Creator who dies and sets everything, and then my pathway through grace through death is the salvific moment, but in me is the one who will fix the system. I will
Right.
transform the misorder of what I perceive to be the misorder of being in man's existence. And he goes on to say, Germino says, Messianic humanism is a strand of political thought which seeks to transform the quality of man's existence, to transcend the limitations and inequalities of human historical situation as it has hitherto been expressed, and to make fundamentally a new beginning. There's that revolutionary spirit, right? And you can see everything you talked about, disillusion of boundaries. Now I'm God.
Right.
I must transcend the limits. I must be beyond good and evil, right? And that also this notion of like, why is rights even important? Why is freedom? Why is this stuff enshrouded in United States law? Like, why is that even a good thing? It's not a difference in degree. I mean, kind. Between Marxism and the American experiment, but only degree. They all have the same stupid messianic starting point
Right.
in secular humanism, that a new world order, right?
Right.
And as you see on the dollar, right? A
It-
new beginning, a new. It's the revolution,
right.
and
And that
we're
worship
gonna.
of oneself, it takes on a different form, I would argue, post enlightenment. And so pre enlightenment,
Yes.
it's why all these magical systems get going, because those systems then are the methodology for the apatheotic self divinizing process. So whether it be Kabbalah, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, alchemy, Rosicrucianism, doesn't matter what you call it. All these are different various systems to try to then self-divinize man, because it's a humanist presupposition that man must re-elevate himself. After the Enlightenment, man does away with the superstition, and that's what humanism does. It does away with the superstition, and therefore man is the measure of all things now, because it's all about the scientific method and rationality. So it's no longer about self-divinizing. In a way, he's already been divinized in his system, because you can't get much higher. Whether it be
Yeah.
Darwinian theory, biology, and evolution, it all leads to this point where nothing beyond man is in importance anymore. I mean, again, we did a whole stream on metaphysics. Metaphysics begins to break down after this point.
And Germino goes on to say, too, this is exactly what leads to the totalitarianism of the 20th century. And he says that to the extent to which the messianic humanists seek to overthrow any idea of limitation on human action. How profound is that?
Right.
And he says he can see the totalitarian government insofar as ruthlessly and deliberately seeks to destroy individuals in the interest of a social system, some by forced subjugation, others by as identifying as undesirable by the ideology. And by the way, this is all important to identify. This isn't something that just happened in the 20th century with the fascists and the National Socialists and these different movements. This is key to unlocking technocracy, right?
Right.
And so this is great. In the book Beyond Ideology, he suggests that whereas the theocentric humanists call for metonia, he says, change of heart or attitude towards existence, messianic humanists envision the qualitative transformation, metastasis of existence as a goal. And so notice it becomes on, I'm the master of nature. And they simply, what does he say? Messianic and metastatic humans are also concerned with inner conversion of men. They're simply more optimistic than the theocentric humanists about man's abilities to. And that's the thing, too. We hear about progressivism. In some sense, it's really interesting. We live in postmodernity is kind of marked by a despair in the Enlightenment's optimism. But yet they still carry those things like we're progressing. We'll get a utopia. We'll finally get it right. Do you notice those kinds of trends even today? Yep. Even though we've abandoned rationality and all the Enlightenment's precepts, they still carry over this utopianism, the messianic humanism, and progressivism.
Right.
Of this optimism. I find that interesting.
Exactly. So the idea of progress itself is tied to this idea that one has, discovered a new concept with humanism itself, and that therefore we're going to progress further. And in a way, you can't also help but realize that this led into, again, the elevation of the scientific method, pointing again to Francis Bacon and people like that. And so they're making more things. In a way, they're making more progress. So in their minds, this all goes together. They're on the right track. And
it goes into transhumanism too.
Right. And that's where I was going to get to posthumanism, because even within posthumanism, you see it break down because there's two schools. There's philosophical, cultural posthumanism, which is literally rejecting now the anthropocentric emphasis of humanism. That's why they consider it posthumanism, whereas the technological scientific strand of posthumanism maintains, and they view themselves as continuous with the humanistic tradition, because they maintain the anthropocentric center. And what they're doing is that we're posthuman in the sense we're breaking down the boundary between human and non-human. Therefore, technology, posthumanism, transhumanism, this is the new way. So posthumanism breaks into and bifurcates into two strands. One that totally does away with the anthropocentric centering of mankind. The other one maintains it, but it now blurs the distinction between biology and non-biology, technology and man itself. So these things can't occur without, again, the humanist presuppositions that are laid forth here.
And so another, I think, important humanist principle is that man's ability to liberate his fellows, to plan political reorganization, right? So notice salvation isn't the theocentric, the theanthropos, right? God-man, life itself dying and overturning Hades and breaking out on the other side so that the devil no longer has a hold. And of man in the grave, because that was the devil's dominion was the grave.
Right.
That was, and Father Russell talked about it really nice, that, you see in the harrowing of Hades. I wonder if I have, no, it's not in that one. Sometimes do you see a monster's mouth? You ever seen that? Where the
Mm-mm.
grave's in the devil's mouth. And the devil had dominion. He owned the grave and he held everybody in there. There was no escape. The grave is not considered a great place, right? And then life itself comes in, and the devil, through his pride, doesn't realize it's life itself. He thinks that Christ made a mistake.
Right.
That, oh, how dumb. Um, Christ became enfleshed. I've got him now because flesh is going to die. And I will
Right.
hold him in the grave, not realizing who Christ was, his life. And so, as Father Russell says, the devil bit on a jawbreaker and broke his mouth.
I like that.
And Christ pulled out, right? He broke the devil's mouth and his hold, pulls Adam and Eve out, and you can see that, like, Adam and Eve were probably like so full of joy how long they have been waiting. And to see their Savior, who created them and walked with them in the garden, they're fixing it. I mean, that's a profound idea.
Right.
And anyways,
And let me continue on there, because
yeah,
the maintaining of Christ as a theanthropic, the theanthropic principle and centering of the Christian worldview maintained these transcendent realities. Again,
yes,
metaphysics itself, this logos theology, universals. As humanism develops, and it takes a while, and really until the Enlightenment, until Kant, to really point out that, well, a lot of your presuppositions aren't justified anymore. Something,
yeah,
again, what we do with tag. That's so the humanist movement does away with the transcendent reality of God. It can, again, it's messing around with it with all the spiritualism and the magic and stuff pre-enlightenment, but philosophy, quote unquote, begins with Descartes, but once it gets to Kant, he's saying, guys, you really don't have a basis for maintaining all these universals and the concept that you actually knowing the world itself. And I would argue, and I'm sure you would too, this was because humanism, again, starting in the 1300s, you've already done away with the centering point of God. See, the God man maintains all of it together. It brings the
yeah,
immanent and the transcendent together, whereas
absolutely.
without realizing it, it takes centuries. They're doing away with the transcendent. They're just assuming the transcendent, but they're only focusing on the immanent.
And so then the immanent, the political must be the solution. Through, what did I say? Central planning of political organ. So notice everything we hear today, it's always, and even going into transhumanism, salvation is going to be through planned political reorganization. Politics is going to save us. That's why we always say politics is not going to save you. Politics can't conquer death. And then Germino has this really cool quote. He says, "I continue to be disturbed by the possibility that this benevolent impulse," and notice the road to hell is paved with good intentions and benevolent impulses, "toward radical improvement of humanity's lot might be transformed into a kind of manipulation and social engineering that would only make further inroads on individual freedom and dignity." Now it seems to me that many of the proponents of messianic humanism were and are also sensible to these dangers and as determined as I combat them. But he's just showing, like, the problems. It does saying that, like, well, I've got a benevolent impulse to make society better,
Right.
to rid the world of poverty. What's one of the other ones that we hear? To end suffering,
Yeah, in
to
suffering.
increase the longevity of mankind.
Utilitarian, increase the well-being and the greatest good for the greatest number, which becomes, again,
Yeah.
especially once the Enlightenment, we reach the Enlightenment, utilitarianism becomes the morality and the ethical framework for humanism.
Yeah.
And that's still, if you listen to contemporary politics, they're still working on a sort of utilitarian framework. Although, again, we would
Absolutely, it's
say,
everywhere.
yeah,
And that's
So-
what's so funny. I was telling my students too that, have you ever noticed in the alien movies, which we know are demons, and I had a student ask me that, like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, first of all, we just went over in philosophy of science, Tipler and Barrow's cosmological anthropic principle, and they literally crunched the numbers, and they were like, and you have to agree with the universe is 13.5 billion years old, right? You're giving your opponent the benefit of the doubt. Suppose it were, and suppose the expanse of the universe, the amount of matter, the amount of combination, you crunch those numbers, because you always hear people say that, well, the universe is so big, there's so many possible, galaxies, life, there must be intelligent life at least one other place than just us. Well, they actually crunched the numbers, and they were like, that would be, from a naturalistic point of view, the bare minimum for intelligent life to occur just once. That's a scientific argument. I've never seen a mathematical argument. I've never seen anybody refute. So that shows you there are no aliens. There are no organic, intelligent beings. What that means then is they're noetic beings.
Mhm.
And a student asked me, they were Catholic, well, why, Father Deacon, why do you call them demonic? And I'm like, well, what message are they giving? That's how you know. Now that we figured out they're not actually what people consider aliens, they're noetic beings, what message? And it's not the Christian message. It's always this, I noticed they're all utilitarians, right?
Utilitarians,
Well,
and it's always
mankind
an
has to
earthly-
be eliminated.
Yeah, there's always something to do, and same thing true with McKenna and his transforming machine elves. Is that one of the repeating messages was that the planet was overpopulated and that people need to stop having babies, and so it's the same message over and over. It's an earthly utopia that it's just at the end of our fingertips. Again, this has been the humanistic yearning, again, as I pointed, from the 1600s, guys. It's been constantly this idea that we just have to keep going. It's right there. Progress is right here. It's right before us. This again leads to the Enlightenment. It leads to the Industrial Revolution. It leads into the 20th century. It leads into the 21st century where we're at now. And it's the same rhetoric. It's the utilitarian morality. It's the idea that we just have to keep doing what we're doing, keep progressing, keep dissolving more boundaries, right? Keep, transgender women are women. Don't you know? And it's the same humanistic message, because humanism is tied to one, especially after the Enlightenment, it's the full-on rejection of what superstition and religion. So eventually humanism just is a full-on opposition to religion itself. Would be all the contemporary humanistic associations and societies, especially since the 20th century, when they claim, oh, I'm humanist, they're just saying, I reject all of the parts that would be related to God, to the transcendent. And then you would ask, well, how do you begin to justify knowledge? How do you begin to justify your morality? How do you begin to justify universal questioning itself? Well, they can't. And it really just comes to the utilization, and this is where you, as a philosopher of science, the utilization of the scientific method as a form of power. Really, that's what I would argue.
Yeah, it's weaponized.
Yeah, it's been weaponized. And Kant talked about the religion of humanity. And he was the first, he was the last one, after Hegel, to really create this whole totalizing system. He's going to have a grand philosophy that's going to totalize everything. And it was all about the scientification of all fields of inquiry. And this was tied to his belief was this was the religion of humanity. We don't need God anymore. Mankind can create its own religion, which is the religion of reason itself. We see this in the French Revolution. And in ways we see the deism, another strand of the humanism, in the American Revolution. So we see both of them. The atheistic form, again, you could even look at the two revolutions, the French and the American. The American is that deist humanistic form. The French would be that sort of atheistic socialist rejection of the transcendent form. They both come together in the next century. So that would be
I would classify
19th century.
both of them. and I'd classify both of them as messianic humanism.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
And it still
it's
is.
yeah, and it's interesting too. I know we can talk about we live in a postmodern age. I don't think that necessarily commits one to say we've reached the end of modernity. I still think we're in modernity, even though we just live in an interesting time in which we classify post-modernity. Because, like I said, what's new about post-modernity is this disenchantment and this what's the word I want to use? Disenchantment with the kind of optimism of the ideas of reason within the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we're at the end of modernity because we still have these ideas, right, of progress and different stuff. But I do find it interesting. He says that rather profound disenchantment with the two tenets of modern political thought. The man is living in an age excitingly different from any existed prior to the Renaissance. And by the way, that was a mark of enlightenment. There's something new, right? That's where you read the New Atlantis, right?
Yep.
Bacon and these
Right.
different things. There's an excitement there. You kind of lose that. It's and as you said, as reason gets critiqued, and what was it? The phrase that I read today, the dictates of reason. There are every enlightenment. Well, the principle of sufficient reason, the dictates of the enlightened man, the law of
Yeah, the rational soul. Oh, really? We have a soul? Well,
the law of nature, the law.
Yeah.
Like there's all these, like there were just like these self-evident. Certainly, post-modernity
undermines all that and takes that away as for granted. And that's
yeah.
why it's a relativistic epistemology, because postmodernism is saying, look, and again, you wouldn't have this without the collapse of logical positivism, without Quine and their critiques demonstrating you're really just in a web of beliefs. You're in a web of association of presuppositions. And
By the way,
go ahead.
Don't forget too that the Enlightenment was supposed to, these projects, even scientific and epistemological, were supposed to do away with war.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
it seems like the world only gets more and more violent. I just saw a thing that we have more slaves in the world right now than the entire Roman Empire built their empire on slavery. We have more slaves existing in the world right now, and one of the kickers is almost half of the slaves that exist in the world today are sex slaves. So it's just again, the promises of humanism.
I want to bring something up though. Yeah.
I was wanting to say, Bill Hicks here said, he's asking a question: is humanism pretending to be godly? Well, yes, basically deism is humanism trying to maintain the transcendence of a God figure, but one that's no longer in the world, one that no longer has agency on the world, and therefore man, he has the impetus and the divine right to then dictate the way that the world works. So it's humanism plus a God outside of our bubble is basically what deism is. Go ahead, wherever you wanted to go.
Oh, I remember what I wanted to talk about. How many of you have heard of the 30 Years' War?
Well, they should.
So
I just did a whole thing talking about
what.
Yeah.
Oh, did you? Oh, dang.
Well, Rosicrucianism,
So,
because
in the 30 Years'
all those
War,
manifestos occur right before the Battle of White Mountain.
So in 1618 to 1648, do you know how many people died? 4.5 to 8 million soldiers and civilians died. And what I'm going to argue is both this kind of perennialism, which you're going to see again with you probably talked about in the Rosicrucian stream, the perennialism and the these Enlightenment ideas are supposed to solve this problem, right? Of religious conflict,
Yep, that was the idea. Yeah, religion was the problem. Why so many people died. You know, the 30 Years' War is an atrocious period in European history where it was Protestantism and Catholics fighting each other, and as you point out, millions of people dying. And this was then blamed on religion, which again gave the new impetus for the Enlightenment to just, well, let's just kick religion to the side and just focus on the scientific method and rationality.
Yeah, and this is, I don't know if you know this, but I'm trying to get up, maybe you can look it up real quick because I put it in my last paper.
Yeah.
But guess the first word of monotheistic theism comes from in history.
Well, I don't know what you're asking. The
Well,
first
this is really
word of
interesting. The first occurrence of monotheism.
Generally, it's accredited to Zoroastrianism, isn't it?
No, this is gonna blow your mind. First occurrence. Now I'm talking about the term being used. I'm not talking about what we would identify as.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not familiar who the first one to coin monotheism was.
One second, let me keep talking. I'm gonna pop this up and find it for just because I don't want to mislead anybody on the date.
Well, and one of the things that I was thinking too is that we've heard of humanism is basically it is the Good Samaritan version of Christianity. So humanism, again, it borrows so much from the Christian paradigm, which is what we're trying to highlight to you guys right now. It really, and that's why postmodernity occurs, is because the justification, the justifying foundation of humanism falls out. There is no way to talk about humanity as a rational soul and all this different stuff. And that's why when we get into post-humanism, as I've talked about, especially the techno-scientific, both the techno-scientific and what I've talked about is the cultural philosophical post-humanism, they do away with the concept of an essence to man because, again, they've done away with universals. So post-modernity does away with the universality of philosophy itself, so the universal claims, and then post-humanism maintains that, but post-humanism maintains the techno-scientific, maintains the rationality and the anthropocentric nature of it, but man has no essence. Therefore, we can just fuse him with everything because nothing has an essence. Everything is basically what we do with it because there is no transcendent reality to it.
I got it.
You find what
This is going to blow your mind. All right, so keep in mind what did I say? The 30
years
war, the dates of that 1680, 1648. The first use of the term monotheism, 1660, Henry Moore. And
wow.
Yeah. And monotheist by the same person, 1680. And theism, Edward Maritain in 1662. So
yeah,
that
that's all 17th
never
century.
used yet right during the 30 Years' War.
Right.
And the reason why they introduced this, here's the perennialism.
Yes.
Oh, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, like we don't need any division, right? So this is what I'm trying to say to you is that this is part of this optimism of the Enlightenment that, we'll break down those boundaries. We'll solve all wars, right? It'll be through this political central planning through man, right? And one of the key terms is, but we all worship the same God. Well, what are we going to say? We're all monotheists. Nobody ever used that word before.
Right.
Does that make sense? I think that's a pretty
profound.
Well,
it does make sense. And I've talked about, because I've written a little bit about trying to trace the origins of perennialism itself. And so when the Muslims controlled Spain and on the Iberian Peninsula there, they had all these mystic schools. So the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, the Sufis, the Kabbalists, and the Christian mystics We're all there together, trying each other's practices, sharing different rituals, trying to achieve different, different goals, different alchemical ends. And this brought together the presupposition of a perennial worldview, which then the Prisca Theologia of the Italian Renaissance, right there where we get the Renaissance humanism gets going, the idea that all these religions of the contemporary period are sort of diluted versions from this primordial truth that God gave to mankind, which again, before the Hermetic corpus got redated, they thought it was Hermes Trismegistus. So this perennial attitude, you're totally right. It gets festered. It's tied with the humanism, because man then can sort of utilize these different traditions as a ways to extend himself in the world, borrow what he likes, grab what he likes. But as you're pointing out with the 30 Years' War, now we have this immense conflict between Protestants and Catholics becoming one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. And so as we move towards the end of the 17th century and the Enlightenment arrives, well, let's just do away with religion. Let's just focus on rationality, humanity, the scientific method. And this was then a foundational presupposition that led to the American, the French revolutions of the 18th century. But then, there's believed there's going to be no more world wars. But look what happens in the 20th century. We have the most destructive period in European history, which is World War I, and then even more so World War II.
Wow, you see, we just didn't get it right. Plan it more. By the way, this sets up from the 1800s Saint Simon and Comte with scientism, and talk about secular humanism. I mean, look at this guy, dude.
Which one?
Saint Simon. He literally made a proposal addressed to Napoleon, where to establish a Council of Newton. Bring in the Council of Newton. That's why we messed up on the wars. We didn't have a Council of Newton. And we're gonna have council members elected. We'll have a grand council. Yeah, great. Put that up. This will bring world peace. This, by the way, this hasn't ended because we're in scientism.
Right. And of course, they always have a socialist ethic. There's always a socialist ethic to it. Yep. And that's, again,
religion. It's a new religion.
And when we look at World War II, what is it? It's fascism versus communism. I mean, these are just two ends of different concepts of how we get to this sort of socialistic utopia, which they always want to borrow then from Christian. Well, don't you know that Jesus was a socialist? No, dude. Like we don't get utopia on this end of the apocalypse, bruh. Like it's gonna get, like, you have to deal with the fall until we get utopia, and perfection can only be tied to God, because those are transcendent concepts in themselves. Because perfection presupposes an ideal, and an ideal must be rooted in something that's unchanging.
Saint Simon Comte's call for government run principle by scientific and technocratic experts, who will use social physics and social engineering, all in a benevolent practice, of course, to progress mankind to the utopia. And I can't remember if it was, and this is going to bring about peace, right? So think about like Klaus, right? And everything that he's saying. Now, I think there's going to be a new Christianity. The Saint Simonian, the followers of Saint Simone. Get this, dude. Are you guys ready? Are you sitting in your seats?
I'm sitting.
They preached a message of full psychic and physical liberation, and anticipated in many respects the attack of contemporary radical thought on they use this term, I kid you not, repressive society, repressive sexual. So, and they advocated for sexual promiscuity.
I'm not surprised.
And this would fulfill man's own psychic needs and free him We
Right.
got to transcend this puritanical, right? I kid you not, they're actually talking about this. Not only
No, it
that,
makes total sense. I mean, even Francis Bacon, it's known that he preferred male love. So he had a wife, he had kids, but him and also you could see King James the First of England, they both preferred sex with dudes. And I think this is part of the narcissistic impulse of humanism, which has always been a male-oriented thing. And I just did a stream with Rachel Wilson talking about the
yeah.
erasing of traditional women in society today. So the androgyne is a man who then gets the breast implants and acts more effeminate and whatnot. But
Well,
they
look, I
erase
kid you
the
not. They said we need to find a female messiah. Dude, this is in the 1800s. Like, this is what's so crazy. And that the John the Baptist is a female version. Let's see. Wait, this guy, Infantin, the father of this cult of Saint Simon, claimed only to be the forerunners of. He called himself John the Baptist,
Wow.
and who fully emancipated her own sex would complete the emancipation for mankind. This reminds you of Crowley.
Mhm.
Now, I kid you not, it goes further. It Fourier and Marcuse. But what I find really interesting is all this stuff on this sexual liberation ends up. Where did I read this? Dude, this is going to blow your mind, dude.
Which makes sense, right? They do away with God, which is the moral justification for certain sexual mores, right? Sex is for reproduction. Sex is
Yeah.
within within the sacrament of marriage. Well, once we do away with God and now we're just pure rational beings, okay, so you prefer man love. Okay, that's great. We need to liberate you guys.
These books on the sexual liberation of the Saint Simon cult, they were not published, and right, the writings, and guess until when?
The 20th century.
The 60s. Kid you not, like, you can't make this stuff up.
Oh my gosh.
But
It's
this
like
is
a
going to
script.
go into the new world order, and he talks about too that with the mix of the, as you brought up, but it didn't bring peace. It didn't bring these progresses, the Enlightenment, and so you get this disenfranchised kind of and disenchanted view that's post modernity. So now these boundaries, he says, between left and right become meaningless,
Right.
right? Into the postmodern mind.
Right.
And you get also this, critique and not construction, right? So the contemporary current protester, right? They're not building anything. They're tearing it all down. Everything, it doesn't matter if they're illogical because reasons is racist, and everything's just breaking down everything.
Right.
Like you'd pointed out too, even in terms of the sexual, none of it's life-giving. Everything that's
Right.
encouraged. But I think they're still in the midst of that modernity in the elite is like, this is great. They're in this synergy and kind of dance with the disenchanted postmodern aspects of our time. Great. It's setting up for what? Politics doesn't matter anymore. One
Right.
world government does.
Right. And
We can
well,
still,
you made
we can
2
still
points that I
build.
want to connect on. One, the doing away with the sort of dialectic, the perceived dialectic, but then also the disenchantment of the world, which is another product of Enlightenment humanism as opposed to Renaissance humanism. And so the first one is like for what I'm working on with my work with transhumanism, one of the big theoretical frames that I'm using is post-secularism, developed by Jürgen Habermas, which is talking about
Yes.
post-secularism dissolves the distinction between the religious and the secular. So humanism, as we've been talking about, even 20th century humanism, is all based on this principle that they're rational beings and they don't engage with the religion, and religion is superstitious and religion is backwards, and we need to do away with that because that's the problems with the world. Well, this idea, the secularist idea, believed that religion was going to go away in the 20th century, which it definitely did not. And so post-secularism, as Jürgen Habermas talked about, well, really what it is then is these things are no longer bifurcated or there's a dialectical tension to them. What it is now is it's all just a reenchantment of the world. And we use religious rhetoric and religious discourse to talk about our secular ways in which we reenchant and find meaning in the world. And so post-secularism is essential to how I'm redefining the scientific movement of transhumanism as a religious discourse.
Yeah, good point.
Your mic's pulled away. We can't hear you.
Good point.
Yeah. So
this is so exciting. This is great topics.
Yeah. So that post-secularism is so important because secularism is an essential part of humanism. And then you can see the post-humanism, the post-secularism, the postmodernism, all these things coalesce together. And in a way, one of the things that I think they're doing too, it's another form of the privileging of unity over multiplicity. You talked about a one world government, but if we do away with objective truth, there's just relativism. Well, unity, all unity of subjectivity. If you do away with religion and non-religion, there's just religious discourse, no matter what you're talking about. It's all religious discourse. And so it's all, like you said, creating these sort of presuppositions in our societies to lead us towards, well, unity, which is all about moving into the kingdom of the Antichrist, which is going to be a one world government.
Yep. Great point. And you've, like you said, you're fantastic at the kind of disillusions of boundaries and stuff. And that's why we really have to see that the neo-Gnostic technocratic movement and scientism is magic.
Yes.
It's sorcery.
Yes.
It's because what is sorcery? To dissolve boundaries and categories and make all one.
Right.
And this is in Crowley and all the occultists. They're like just telling you, they're like, this is what we're doing.
And Crowley does away. He's a postmodern before postmodernism because he's already antinomial in the sense that there's no law, there's no objectivity, it's all subjectivity. And what it's about is substantiating one's will onto the world. Yeah. And that his magical techniques, his thelemic techniques, he claimed is a science of the will. It's a science to get the world to accord to one's will. And that's where you start looking into his butt stuff and sacrifices and magic rituals. Now we can point to some of the crazy things going on in our world. These are rituals. And these really are ways in which certain people are being able to substantiate and establish their will, their power onto the world.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if he'd actually read any of Saint Simon and
I'm
who
sure
was the guy, the cult leader that started the religion.
He got a wealthy English education in the Victorian period. He definitely read all that stuff. And, he's definitely inspired by Nietzsche. And again, doing away with all universals. Because Nietzsche, he was already there. It's all about will. It's all about the Ubermensch. And again, what do we know about Nietzsche? Gay, paying for sex in brothels. It's the same motif over and over, no matter what century you peer into. And what it is just the train carts are getting off the rails more and more and more and more. And that's why we look at the world right now. There's more chaos, because there's less transcendent order because people don't even believe in it. Yeah. I love this. AC says transgressive.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great. It was Comte, the founder of the universal religion. Like all these terms, like universal religion.
Yeah, that's what I had.
Look at this. High priest of humanity.
Yep. And he said science and rationality was going to be the religion of humanity. That was his whole thing. And so we look at the world today, and rationality isn't for the pursuit of truth. And that's one thing that people, I think, again, aren't as sophisticated in some of the discourse that we're talking about, and say, well, we're rational people today, and the elites of the world, they're still rational. Well, rationality is an instrument. What is the goal? You see, when we believed in God, we used rationality to discover things that were true. In the postmodern turn, rationality is an instrument to establish more power over other people. That's not the same thing. Both of them can be rational methodologies. I can be rational to how I'm going to, acquire something that's incredibly detrimental to other people. Rationality doesn't equal truth. And that's why rationality and logic are not the same thing. Rationality is a way, it's an internal instrument of ourselves to acquire something in a rational means. Rationality in the postmodern period is all about power. It's not about the discovery of something that's objectively true, because that would then tie us back to all these transcendentals that we're talking about that they've rejected for centuries now.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had office hours with a student, and we're talking about, I guess there's some philosophy book called BS, the art of, or the science of BS. And I'm not going to say the word, but it's the full word. And we were talking about this in terms of rationality, because obviously you and I have done debates and talked to different people. And what you find is oftentimes a closedness, right? That I can't get anywhere with somebody. And this is what's supposed to be like the BS, right? Is that they're using rationality, but they're not open to pursue of truth. This is why one thing that can reveal that is, what would it take for you to change your position? And they obviously then either make some ridiculous standard, right, that's unattainable, or they say nothing, right? And which reveal, it's like, I'm right. And I was telling her, because she was writing her paper on refuting flat earthers, and I'm like, what makes me so upset about they've got this I couldn't figure out what annoyed me. I'm like, it's what annoys me about anything else. I think it's narcissistic. There's nothing you can do to change the position. Not only is it just bad scientific and reasoning itself, and we've noticed this argument with different religions too. There's not an openness, right? It's a closed system, and then reasons being used in terms of will to win. It's sophistical, to be honest. And
which can be, you can use rationality and be a sophist. It's just counter to us as Christians. But it just seems like, I'm sure for a lot of people, like, what, you can not believe in objective truth and be rational? Well, we would say that's irrational, because we're Christians. But in this sort of instrumental use of reason, in a way, these people are acting rational, but for irrational purposes.
Which is exactly what the sophists
do. That's why they're so good at rhetoric.
Which is sorcery with words.
Exactly.
Magic.
It's because it manipulates people's perception of reality. So it doesn't matter if I'm David Blaine and I'm doing a card trick, or I'm using rhetorical language to elicit emotions and perceptions out of your mind, so that you then are inhabiting conceptually a world that really isn't there. And that's exactly what we're in right now.
And by the way, she brought up something really interesting, because I was trying to figure out, she's done obviously more research because she's writing her paper. What's the resurgence in flat earthers? Like, where is this coming from? And I would say this is the hallmark of a secular humanist kind of idea. Now, they like to think that, like, no, we're reorienting God and stuff like that, but it has all the hallmarks of, in fact, do you know the founder of the Flat Earth Society is in the 1800s? Right? And it's not a scientist. He calls himself an inventor. And I make the same thing with, like, critique of Protestantism. It's a modern ideology. It's got all the hallmark problems of modernity. Right? What's this say here?
Rationalism is a system that presupposes the ultimacy of reason without asking from whence it comes.
And both Germino and Eric Vogelin talk about what makes them, let's say, the hallmark of modernity and actually neo-Gnostic is the you've got to build a system, right? In which you now focus, as he had pointed out, it's not God that is the standard of the order of being, it's man. And so you did this kind of crime, but you have to hide the swindle. You have to hide the crime. And you have to
Right.
hide the crime in the system that you built. And you build in such that you can't ask those questions. Does
Yep.
that make sense? And that's
Yep.
what makes it a neo-Gnostic.
Yep. And
So,
I
yeah, go
want to
ahead.
continue on that because one of the things, again, I'm using for transhumanism that again really got popular from your favorite Yuval Noah Harari's right here, his Homo Deus,
Yeah.
is that the philosophy of what's called dataism. Dataism presupposes that the only thing that really exists is data. You and I are biological algorithms. We're creating silicone electronic algorithms. Everything is about the processing of data. Therefore, we need an advanced artificial intelligence so that it can process more data because you and I are limited due to our wetware. Our software isn't advanced. And this dataism is all about the belief that we just have to acquire more data, more data, more data, more data, and we're going to become Homo Deus, God, the God man. This is a Gnostic impulse. This is in two ways. One, it's anti-biological, which is also a Gnostic impulse. And two,
Yes.
it's this idea that as we acquire more data, we become more divine. We become more knowledgeable, more aware of our circumstances and the universal happenings. This is exactly what the transhumanists believe. This is, again, part of what I'm be writing about is dataism is a fundamental philosophical presupposition that ties it back to the history of Gnostic belief systems. And the whole idea is that you're not going to be in a body anymore because they want to be in some sort of disembodied state, which is for them immortal. This is Gnosticism all revamped. It's Gnosticism that goes through the scientific process, goes through the scientific rationalism, goes through the humanistic process, post-enlightenment, post-modernity, and then post-humanism, post-secularism. Bam! Now we have our culminating new religion. It's about disembodiment, so we can find the increases in suicide, antidepressant drugs. People are upset with the state of their own biological existence. They're chopping off their own testicles. They're having mastectomies. Girls. I saw the latest, what was it? Burberry ad showed two trans, and there's literally a chick with these huge scars right here holding a dude who's a girl, and they got tattoos and their facial piercings, all this different stuff. It's anti-aesthetic. It's anti-beauty, it's anti-truth, it's anti-morality. It's all these things wrapped together because fundamentally it's a sort of demonic Gnostic impulse for you to destroy your biological self
And I wanted to talk to
worship
Pajot about that. I know that you got a chance to talk to him
tomorrow morning, 10 a.m.
Okay, in the future, but because you've been using my time machine, the future was actually the past. But you should talk to him about this and let him know that I'm interested in talking about this too. But that look at the kind of modern political leftist activists or something like that, or the woker or the wokest, the physiognomy, why are they so ugly, right? Why,
It's true.
like they purposely do, like it's look, it's an outpouring, it's an emergent phenomenon on probably unconsciously
of their own
these
presuppositions.
I mean, look, if I can figure that out with architecture and be like, why is this building so ugly?
Yeah.
And trace it back to certain philosophies and history. We can do the same thing with people. Why are they mute? That's what you're saying. They're putting it all together, right? It's anti-aesthetic. It's anti-life. It's all these different things. It is the antithesis of the sacred. It's the profane.
Yes, it is. Which is then again post-secular uses religious language to re-enchant this antithesis. this profane antithesis to God is being re-enchanted through discourse, through rhetoric, and through the same expectations that people, you and I have. Okay, we're hoping, again, God willing, we'll be able to make it to the kingdom and experience eternity, experience a form of immortality. Now, we aren't immortal, but we get to, by the grace of God, participate in something that's akin to it. Obviously, we have a beginning point, but we get to be in eternity with God. Well, they're just promising all the same stuff. That's where transhumanism is just the most subtle that I talked about with Father Peter here. It is literally orthodoxy just flipped. It's literally the entirety of our orthodox paradigm just flipped in reverse.
And you know what, too? I mean, if you think about this in terms of the demonic as well, that the angels are beautiful. How is it the demons are so ugly and fearful, and their ideology, they corrupted them. And that's why I put up that meme of Baphomet. I think I put it was on Twitter. Was saying I was into transgenderism before it was cool.
I saw that one. I didn't know. Yeah, once you said that, I remember that one. I liked that one. That was funny. Yeah. Which that goes all the way back to the Knights Templar of the 12th century. You know, that's back into the Crusades, where they go back to the Holy Land. What do? They get initiated into all these Gnostic heresies, which the Gnostic heresy is all about the privileging of unity over multiplicity. Bring it all together. Baphomet is an image of bringing it all together in one image. It's both up and down. It's both animal and man. It's both male and female. It's both divine. It's both good and evil, right? It's all of it together, which is exactly what we're talking about.
And that is profane.
Yeah.
Now it takes virtues to notice that. I remember an undergraduate, and it's because my swear was disordered. I didn't understand this argument, but they were right. They had an objective standard that they are, the professors and the students argued for beauty in art and music. But we live in a kind of relativistic society where it's like, well, for me, this art is beautiful to me, right? And I like this music, and I kid you not, you know what the argument they gave back to me, they're like, because your soul's disordered. And I found it offensive, but they were right.
Mm-hmm.
Why does bad music or bad art look and sound good to me? Because you're bad.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I
Look
love
at the
that
bad criminals. They find it, what are them that say call good evil and evil good, right? But for the criminal and the what's the term I want to use? The reprobate and the starts with a V. I lost my. Anyways, for them, the villain. Bad things are fun and good.
Right. This is the worship of the anti-hero. This is the Nietzschean in way of the Nietzschean turn in art. It's the Joker phenomenon, right? It's the incel. It's the modern incel. It's the person that really is ready for the world to burn down because it's the nihilism that they don't have anything to live for. There's not a foundation to build upon. Therefore, hopefully we can just tear down what is, which I'm disenfranchised from, and hopefully whatever then emerges from the ashes will be better.
And, all of this is to say, like, the people running around and the wokesters and stuff like that, they don't think they look ugly. They think that's cool, right?
I know it, dude.
But it is ugly. Now, how can I say that? Because I have an objective standard, and I can precept you and destroy your paradigm. That's why I come. Right.
And it's what's interesting is that you look at some of these people, just some of the videos, and even some of my own interactions, there's an avulsion for them to traditional aesthetics, like a woman who looks like a beautiful woman, a man who
It's
looks like a
disgusting to
good-looking
them.
man.
It's repulsive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's repulsive to them. They don't want to see it. It's threatening. It's patriarchal, right? Because why is it patriarchal? Well, the man looks like that because it's masculine characteristics, which people find, aesthetic or some way, and that's patriarchal. And then the women, they're feminine because the men want them feminine, and that's patriarchal. And so you got to switch them. The men have to become feminine. The women have to become masculine, and all you see is the total disorder. And I love
And they're
when
not happy.
no, and of
That's the
course
other
not.
thing. It's a perfect vision of hell, right? So
Yes.
the criminal, like, it's hell for him to hang out around like good, virtuous people and saints, right? Um,
Bill Hicks
so
talking about you says tag is why come
tag
when
is
you're
like,
debating. Like you're debating like why they're ugly. It's because tag, you idiot.
I gave this kid the argument at the brewery next door. These cool guys, but we're actually talking about transgender, and they were kids and stuff. They obviously um they weren't Christians, I don't think. And so he's like, I noticed you made a statement that these people are insane. I'm like, yeah, that's insanity. And he asked me, well, how do you determine who's insane or not? And I'm like, well, man can't build an autonomous system and have a judge and a measure of that. And so the only person in a position to know is the Trinity, who reveals himself to and is preserved in the faith and gives us an objective standard by which man couldn't. And he was like, I was going to go with common sense. That's what he said.
Well, if he was going with common sense, then he would take your advice, because that's partly, and it's funny because God's pushing so many people in this direction, whether it's you and I and other people who, through our own philosophical, academic, scholastic searches, eventually come to the conclusion that the safe haven only is orthodoxy. It's the only thing that makes sense. It's the only thing that puts all the pieces in the right place. Or it's 2020 where people realize, oh crap, maybe I'll die tomorrow. Maybe I'll die in the next. Maybe the elites are trying to kill me. If that's the case, maybe evil exists. Evil exists? Well, if evil exists, the opposite must exist. If the opposite, then which one is it? And then they start going on their own journey. God's calling all of us right now. I think that's why orthodoxy is seeing such an explosion, some would say, in the Western world at the same time that the Western world is falling apart, because it's the only thing that's going to give you a refuge for your soul. As Thomas Henderson just said, heaven starts now and so does hell. And people are choosing their destinations right now, because after 2020, it's like time has already broken down somehow. There's something, something has happened. Again, you're the time traveler here, right? So something has broken fundamentally down, or like time is the casuistry of time is working at a different pace than it ever has.
By the way, can I read you something I wrote that was just relevant to you?
Sure.
I wrote from my time machine. Here it goes. It's a poem. No, I'm kidding. Can you imagine? So it was when you were talking about anti-asceticism, anti, in a sense, reason.
Mm-hmm.
This is the hallmark of everything that we've been talking about with the secular humanism, and let's just call it for what it is. It's Gnosticism.
It is.
It's anti-philosophy. It's anti-asceticism. It's anti-reason, in as much as it severs the transcendent ground. Here's my tag of the intelligible world of being,
right,
and creates a man-made speculative project. So if the necessary conditions for the order of being and knowledge and beauty and science and all these things is God, the transcendent ground, wisdom, let us attend. To sever that and create a man-made speculative project whose aim is to have dominion over being, knowledge of the order becomes impossible. You can't have knowledge. So is the person that you read their thing that pulled up about rationalism, but they don't allow that you to ask the question about rationalism being a foundation, right? So what do you have to do? You have to conceal it. You have to conceal the crime that you did. You have to conceal the deicide, the Nietzschean deicide. You have to conceal the swindle. So, for example, Hegel conceals this very thing by doing what? He translates philosophia into gnosis. Philosophia and gnosis into German. Why? So that he can shift between from one and the other, playing on the word knowledge. What do you see going on all the time? This wordplay, right?
Yep.
Using the words to, and this is sophistry, right? Equivocating on this and going back and forth so that you can conceal what's actually going on. In these cases, the very question about the project's first principles. What justifies that? Why right? Why do you have this movement? Why do you look this way? You build the system so you can't answer that. Then, as you see with the Adorno and some of the critical theorists, the language game.
Right.
You play on the language, right? And isn't this sorcery? Listen to my words. Listen to my words, right? Go back and forth, right? Well, first I have to actually have a kind of postmodern notion of there is no objective meaning. Words can be whatever I want them to be.
Exactly.
And I can now play on that to cast a spell over you.
Yes.
That's why, for example, what is a woman, right? What is justice? What is racism? What is all the stuff that the woke says? It's whatever I want it to be.
Right.
I can't clearly define it because clear definitions would have the intention of communicating precisely information, but that's not the goal.
That's not the goal. No,
the goal is to conceal and do a swindle, to do sorcery.
Right.
So the words, once you're labeled white nationalist or race, it doesn't matter if it's true because there is no truth. The fact that is that cast a spell on everybody and you're contaminated.
It's a linguistic baton to beat you with as a power dynamic because the only thing that exists is power. And this is why the media corporations are the magic wands of the people who are pulling the strings behind, it's beyond the Murdochs of the world. It's obviously he's parted. And when we saw Tucker Carlson just get taken off, why? Because he was the only person criticizing the war. He was the only person, criticizing what they're doing with some of the jabbies. He was the only person talking about the gender insanity. And the rest of the people, they'll just do what they're told. And they need to get him off because, like you said, this discourse is a magic spell. Like I said, it doesn't matter if I'm a stage magician. I don't need, whether I'm Chris Angel or David Copperfield, it doesn't matter. The point of stage magic is I get you to see something that really wasn't there. It's an illusion. Well, this other form of linguistic magic and sorcery that we're seeing is getting people to conceptually live in a world that isn't reality, because reality is created by God and God is real. And by getting people to live in this reality that's divorced from it, this is killing them slowly, whether they're doing.
And that's Gnosticism. That is the Gnostic project. And by the way, if I could just plug something, if you haven't seen on my Twitter, I did post something. It's very short. I'm not a follower of Noam Chomsky, but you've got to see this little short clip. It's like 4 minutes, 3 minutes or something like that, on his discussing manufactured consent. Exactly.
What are you on Twitter? Oh, here it is right here. Let me pull
what
you
am
up.
I on Twitter?
You're at Ananias Father.
Yeah, somebody already had Father Ananias, so I couldn't do.
You couldn't go initials?
I don't know. We'll never know because why? I built the system to conceal that question, right?
Okay, so let me pull it here. I can pull it up here.
Can you play it? It's really good.
Yeah, well, let's play it here in a minute. I wanted to get to some of these. Frankie D threw in 499. He said these humanists talking about humanism, but don't even know how to be a real human beings and real heroes. So thank you so much, Frankie D. Also threw in another one and said, Doc Holliday talks about a man like Ringo wanting revenge from being born. I think maybe the Joker archetype seeks revenge on the system that turned its back on them we were designed to be cooperative. What do you think about the Joker archetype?
Dude, that was so profound. Yeah, it's a Luciferian or satanic character, right? And I always rewatch whatchamacallit with Doc Holliday that he's talking about with Ringo. I just blanked on the movie. You know what I'm talking about. And I was blown away by that line that Ringo wants revenge. It's just absolute to tear it all down. Destroy the image of God in man. Hold him in death. Tombstone, yeah, thank you. I kept wanting to say Wyatt Earp, but it's a different movie. Tombstone, yeah, I'd watched that and I was like, that is a crazy thing to say, but it was the perfect.
I've actually never watched it.
It was the perfect the perfect kind of like personification of Satan, like,
yeah.
And the Joker has this too, and depression has this too. This is why just depression's a spiritual ailment, right? What happens? You go inward, right? And you hate yourself, and then you hate the world, and then you hate the creator, right? And then you want to spread the suffering and destruction. It's not enough that I'm suffering and I hate myself. Everybody's got to die. Everything's got to be taken down. And what did we see? We saw this in trans terrorism in Nashville. You want to see how this plays out? It's not enough that this person hates their body and the created order. And that's why we should call it for what it is, trans terrorism. The whole movement is anti-life, not even in their sense, but like they want to tear down the entire order. It's a satanic movement.
Well, and it's being played out by the way they tear themselves apart, right? So the literal destruction of their own bodies is emblematic, as you're talking about, the confusion of their own soul. They're destroying their own bodies and they're then destroying the world itself. So that's why they are the foot soldiers. That's why the U.S. Army, hey, if you're trans, come on. We need more soldiers. We need more destructive soldiers that are going to aid in this destructive process to initiate this sort of new world, that they plan on. And so, Frankie D, thank you so much, brother, for the super chat. I need to watch Tombstone. Everybody's saying you need to watch Tombstone. I need to check it out. But so the Joker archetype, because I can sympathize with him. I can sympathize with the Joker archetype, again, being disenfranchised by having abusive parents. The Batman archetype being a very wealthy man. Again, he controls society. He's at the higher echelon of society, and then he's going to be a vigilante and then go out and use his technology and his whereabouts to save people. And the Joker is wanting, to burn it all down. I just think that the Joker archetype, I think it's a logical step for the disenfranchised Western man, but it's not a place for a Christian man, because a Christian men are called for construction, not destruction. And that Christ was a carpenter.
How you always know if it's
Christ
the man
was a
of God is
Christ
a man of
peace.
things.
Right. And you can build something adjacent to what's you want to destroy instead of destroying it.
Exactly. It's life creating. The demonic is life destroying. The man of God is one filled with the spirit of peace, right? That's how you tell. The Joker is tormented. So is Ringo. And then that goes, it's not enough to keep it inward. I have to go outward and destroy everything in God's image and order too. Good point.
Yeah. Great super chat, Frankie D. Tatiana throws in $2 and says, Christ is risen, brothers and sisters. Truly, he is risen. Thank you so much, Tatiana. God bless you, sister. And then Adam Nice threw in $4.99, said, ironically, I found this channel through Adam Green, and I'm so thankful. Well, that's one interesting way in, Adam Nice. God bless you. And I'm glad that you're here, brother. Thank you so much for the super chat, and thanks for being part of the community. I hope you enjoy it. So thank you very much. We can check out the video from Noam Chomsky real quick. Just to conclude on the theme of our philosophy discussions we've done. Again, this is the third installment of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. What is good about humanism? Can you name something that would be positive? I know we've been struggling. We've been highly critical through this whole stream, and rightfully so. But is there a point in which we could steel man it and say something positive about humanism?
Yeah, I wrote my friend something interesting that'll tie into this. It's not long. It was just a text, and it'll help me remember. Let's see here. Look, I mean, this was in terms of a conversation about intersectionality, this attempt to have justice and these various things and equity and stuff like that. And I said, and this is what we could say is good about. So I don't think there ever could be a sufficient justice or equity in a secular society. I think we just saw that. We just talked about secular humanism. Correct justice and equity are only found within the Christian paradigm. And the secular societies can only approach that in varying degrees, in as much as they embrace and incorporate the Christian ideals. But we'll inevitably have the problems that we've outlined, right? And that we're seeing today. Why? Because they hold to other principles that are incompatible with the Christian ideals. So it's almost, they're still good in everything, you know? They're still good in the attempt to want to seek justice and want to have human flourishing, right? The problem is, what are the problems? And again, I think there's elements of Christianity. We haven't thrown it completely off. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And the problems arise because there's these other projects, right? They come, and when they come together with contradictory principles, they break, right? So not only is the system, like as opposed to Christianity, going to cause problems, mixing it together is problematic. And that's why I even said, I had called some of this Pentecostal revivalism satanic and demonic. And a priest had tried an attempt to correct me, say, well, it's no more satanic than a secular rock concert. And I'm like, but it is. You know why? Because that's at least just secular. What happens when you mix the sacred and the profane?
Right? Which is the post secularism, as we were talking about.
Yeah. For example, everything in its right place, like sexual intercourse in the marriage bed's great, right? In the privacy of your home, not in liturgical services,
right?
Going to the bathroom, like all these things,
not in kindergarten class.
And so there may be nothing intrinsically wrong with a rock concert. Like, it might be fine. It doesn't belong, or, having a good time, or the passions, enjoying, sensual things. But what happens when you mix them into the sacred?
Mm-hmm.
It's worse. It's far worse than, and Crowley was trying to do this, mix them together, as you had mentioned.
And that's
what
exactly where we are now. Jim Bob makes a really good point. Shout out to our brother, made by Jim Bob. God bless you and the family, brother. Hope you are doing well. He said, could we say humanism still sees man as a peculiar stewards of the created world? I think he has a really good point there.
Yeah, great.
That's a great point that he makes.
See, that's an element of Christianity in there.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that's a part, at least we could say humanism brought that. And humanism still views man, again, in regard to that steward, that sort of pinnacle of creation, if you will. Now, again, it depends on when, because after Darwin, all we are is just a sort of haphazard evolved status of creation. Kind of takes the meaning out of it. But I think Jim Bob makes a really good point. That's probably one of the best things we could say about humanism, is that it still perceives man as the steward of the created world. In regards to the bad and the ugly, what do you think are some of the worst aspects of humanism? I mean, obviously we talked about the destroying of universals. So no longer is there universal truth, no longer is there universal morality, no longer are there essences within things. This is, again, as we talked about, post-humanism does away with the concept of man even having an essence. Most of humanism would say that we had a rational soul, or that man's essence was rational, but even that's kind of been thrown away now. So I would say the bad and the ugly is total lawlessness, total self-worship, total investing into a sort of narcissistic um, concept of progress. So as we talked about, humanism really got going, this idea of progress in history. And in a way, everybody who's bought into these systems are also living out this form of progress. And the way that they're just, oh, well, these women, I'm not going to have kids, maybe when I'm 35, then I'll settle then. But this idea that they're advancing themselves by going counter to all this different stuff. The destruction of their bodies is the way in which they're destroying society. It's all simpatico in multiple degrees. So I would say the bad and the ugly is, one, it's narcissistic, but two, it's totally self-destructive, and it destroys the potentiality of objectivity. And that's exactly what people realized in the 1950s and 60s. And that's what the postmodern turn was. It was the ending process of humanism, and all this stuff coming to basically a dead end and saying, well, looks like that didn't work. I guess the only thing that exists is power.
Yeah, which is exactly what I would say is the bad, and ugly, is that, as Vogelin points out, these systems inevitably lead to totalitarianism.
Yeah.
And so that's what's interesting, is the secular notion of, and they've always got to take something like what the devil does, right? And use the sorcery, but you'll become like God, right? He always takes truth, because you can't take absolute falsehood. You have to take something that's Christian from Christ, and you have to give it a new meaning while keeping enough of the good in there that it actually can deceive. And so the great irony is, uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the secular does just the opposite of what they it absolute unity, a dissolving of boundaries, no equity, subjugation, no inclusion, right? Totalitarianism is the inevitable consequence of these ideologies of humanism that we're talking about. And also, it's a Malthusian death cult. I don't know. So let's wrap up the stream by saying, what can we learn? It's a Malthusian death cult, dude.
I think that's
It ends in death.
I'm going to share the YouTube link as opposed to watching it, just because I don't want to get a copyright strike and get this stream potentially taken down. You know how YouTube is. However, I just shared that link of Noam Chomsky manufacturing consent. I got it from your Twitter. Here, I'll share your Twitter link as well. Guys, go follow Father Deacon over on Twitter. Here's his link as well. There you guys go. So there is the link for Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent video, which Father Deacon shared. And then this is his Twitter. So make sure you follow him on Twitter, because he's always sharing stuff that certainly related and tangential to our conversation here. Again, our goal was to wrap up. Our goal was to not go 2 hours, because when we start talking, it's usually like a 3 hour thing. So we're already at an hour and 55 minutes. So let's try to wrap things up.
That's what I said.
We had a super chat come in from Aunt Jemima, throws in $10 and says, God is not the author of evil. So how would we understand his ordering of the allowance of evil after the fall? Example given, what should we say to a skeptic who would shamefully fault God for allowing human free will to sink to such depths of depravity? So the question of theodicy, Aunt Jemima, this is a very common question, and we as Orthodox do have a bit of a different take on it because we don't have the same dualism between good and evil as some in the West might conceptualize it, because evil is just the absence of God's goodness. It's a privation of. Do you want to take a stab at Orthodox theodicy first, or
Yeah,
how?
real quick. So I don't even have to answer it. Just be like, I don't know. God has its reasons. It's true,
It
in the
is
sense
true.
that he does have his reasons, and a lot of his reasons are hidden to us. But it only poses a problem if there's a logical problem. And as Augustine and Kidron points out, that as long as he has a reason and God's reasons are good, and he can bring about, once it's there, bring about a greater good by allowing it than if he were to prevent it, there's no logical problem. But as far as, well, I have to know the reasons. It's like, no, you don't really have to know the reasons. All you have to know is that there's no logical contradiction, and that God's good, and he does bring about a greater good by allowing it. We certainly see this with parents. Why do parents allow their children to go through bad things when they could stop it? Because they can use that to build character, right? And
Right.
allow them. So obviously parents, and we do that kind of stuff all the time. Certainly God does. And what else should I say about I often argue that it's logically possible that in order to prevent that, God would actually have to do something bad. Suppose eliminate, certain aspects of free will, or do something to humanity.
Right. He would have to
And God
violate
always
us being made in his
maximizes.
image, which he
Yeah.
can't, which he wouldn't want to do. I mean, he could do, because God can do anything, but he made us in his image so that we can then participate in his glory and his energies and his reality. And so he turns all evil into good. So even us being made in the image and having free will, being able to make decisions where we turn our backs against him, um, he uses his infinite benevolence to lead this towards better outcomes.
And keep in mind too, and this is only in the Orthodox, the recapitulation of nature doctrine, everything is made right. All of nature and human nature is restored.
Right.
And I don't mean that in like the bad sense of apostasis, universalism, because if you haven't acquired the virtues, then just like the people that we were talking about, the wokesters and the criminals and stuff like that, your will is not aligned with the will of God through acquiring those virtues. Then when thing is made right, when your nature is made right, when all of nature is made right, you will experience it as hell. Right. But we have to keep in mind, though, God uses death and sin to put everything back in its place.
Right. And
The best way possible. Like there is
yes.
no greater way
And
that
that's why
God
we
can
are
do
choosing our fates right here, right now. Just as Thomas Henderson said, heaven starts now and hell starts now. And as we talked about with some of the Malthusian death cult we're up against, it's bringing people into hell, which is the eternal separation from God. However you want to understand that, that's what hell is. It's the burning of
that.
God's
Yes.
love, because you're not purified by it.
And I'll just end with, if you don't like that answer, then what you're doing is you're exalting yourself above God and creating some type of arbitrary Gnostic man-made standard by which you're going to judge God and his attributes, in which case I precept you and tag is why come and show that you do not have a standard by which to actually say that that's good or bad. That's a short answer. I know that's mean. I'm sorry.
George throws in $1 and says, hey, just following up on my chats from earlier this week, as I realized I may have came off as a spurg, I figured out the grotto is Masonic adjacent, not Rosicrucian. And the AF question, I agree with you. I appreciate the candid response. God bless. Well, thank you very much, George. I appreciate it. God bless you as well. our beloved sister in Christ, Amptown 1, she goes to my church. She says, I love it when Father Deacon Doctor is on. So she's a big fan of yours. And then Jared Fetzer, one of our premium members, throws in $5 and says, one demonic evil thing humanism does is it takes the inverse of man being the mechanism by which nature gets closer to God, and rather humanism teaches us we are intelligent animals, and thus it actually puts nature closer to hell. I would agree with that outside the description of man being a mechanism. So I'm totally with you, Jared, and I see exactly what you're saying. He's saying that instead, humanism, what it does, instead of utilizing man as made in the image of God, therefore bringing nature and God together, which is what the intention was, and that's what Christ did, humanism is teaching that we're intelligent animals and therefore separating us from God and taking nature itself closer to hell, is what he's trying to say.
Got it.
Next one comes from George. Throws in $1. This is the last super chat, and he says, question for FDA. How do we Orthodox reconcile working and making money for firms/companies that support the Skittles, Global Homo, and ESG agenda?
Whew. That's a hard.
That's one for a spiritual father for everybody's individual circumstance.
So, I mean, there's similar things that come up in bioethics, and things called like the doctrine of double effect and stuff like that. So, one thing that comes up as far as like medicines, kind of testing and stuff like that we live in a fallen world, and that's a reality that is inescapable, and that the doctrine of double effect would be your intention in doing a particular action, whether it's in medicine, even just war theory has this, or working or something like this, is not aimed at killing or having these bad things necessarily in the research process of certain medications. But inevitably, this stuff's going to happen. So there are cases using the doctrine of double effect in which that will be allowed. But then there's other stuff that seems reasonable that I can separate, and I can achieve the same good without being involved in that. In which case you would be morally complicit too. So that's a difficult. You kind of have to think through these things through ethics, and then also with your spiritual father. So there are cases where you're morally complicit, and there's cases that you're not. So we can't simply just have a general rule that, well, I have a company. I mean, I work at colleges that are engaged in receiving funding from terrible organizations. Does it make me? No, I have a kind of doctrine of double
hypocrite.
You hypocrite, right? And that's philosophy. I just use sorcery with words to justify my immoral behavior. That's what my mom tells me all the time. She's like, "That's the only reason why you're in the philosophy. It's just to justify yourself." Well, wait a minute, Mother. I thought justification was a good thing. Sophistry.
That's funny. Great answer. And I wanted to highlight this. David makes it great. It's so short, but so accurate. Humanism is animalism. I really love that because its defining characteristic is to turn away from the transcendent. And last super chat, and I'll get you out of here, Father Deacon, so you can get back to your beloved wife. Harry Serpanos throws in $10, says, God bless you both for your good work. Well, guys, I want to, thank Harry Serpanos and everybody who super chatted. Shout out to George. Shout out to my buddy, Jared Fetzer. God bless you and your family. Shout out to my beloved friend, Amptown 1, Adam Neese, Tatiana, Frankie D, Aunt Jemima, I wanted to also again tell you guys, get your tickets for Montanica if you have not. If you
You get a
have
chance
not,
to meet my wife.
there you go.
Yeah. Nobody's bought any since we've callers are waiting in the back room right now to take your credit card
There's three
information.
tables of callers.
That's right.
But guys, I'm telling you, if you haven't, if you can go to Montanica, it's going to be so much fun. It's going to be so worth it. Again, you get to hang out with us, go to some breweries, drink some beers, talk
Come taste and
philosophy.
see. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Come taste
The
and see.
Montanica's good. Yeah.
True, it is though.
It really is.
It's prayer services, it's vespers, it's liturgy,
Fellowship.
it's brothers and sisters in the faith, it's breweries, it's hanging out, it's having a good time, it's having a cigar or two with some friends, it's talking philosophy, talking about the world. It's
We have a
lot
cigar
of fun.
vendor who's coming.
Oh, really? I'm
Yep.
excited for that.
He's from Bozeman. He's from the Orthodox parish down there, and he's coming up, and he's one of our vendors.
Wow.
And we'll, of course, the church is a non-smoking campus, but you just walk off over to the street, and when you're out and about, and just don't smoke in the what is it, the mines full of gas, flammable gas.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but Butte is a mining town, so be careful where you throw your butt. But anyways, we just want to tell you guys, if you can, get your tickets to Montanica. I'm telling you, it's worth it. We always have so much fun. This year's going to be a lot of fun. Father Turbo's going to be there. We got a bishop. Bishop Maxim's going to be there. Father Russell, I can't wait to see him again and give him a big hug.
Father Paniotos, Father David from Boise, Idaho, the Rocor Parish, lots of deacons, lots of subdeacons. I'm trying to remember. I was trying to go through the other day the list of all the clergy that are coming too.
Yeah. So if you haven't, get that. And also, if anybody's looking for some Orthodox items, go check out orthodoxdepot.com and you can get 10% off with the promo code COTEL. So if you need some necklaces or a prayer book, or you're looking for anything in particular, go check that out. Father Deacon, I got your link in the video description. So go subscribe to Patristic Faith. Is there anything you want to leave with the people before hopping off here?
Just a reminder again, tomorrow's the last day that you can get those discounted tickets. We extended it another week. So, again, I just can't tell you how great it's going to be. We may even have a surprise guest speaker that I'm working with too. That's the lineup's better than ever. And if you haven't met Bishop Maxim, he's absolutely amazing. He's a patristic scholar, St. Maximus. We were in Greece together, and his paper on St. Maximus at the St. Maximus session was incredible. I think they even have it recorded. I hope that session will go up. I even presented for somebody one of the St. Maximus paper, but it was just, you're really going to love Bishop Maxime. You, of course, Father Turbo, but also Abbess Emiliani, who, dare I say, is, gifted spiritually and even clairvoyant, and has just done miracles for my family. And and we have a whole group of sisters and an abbess from the Serbian Midwest diocese coming out. So there's going to be a huge monastic presence. I mean, it's better than ever. Like, I can't believe you guys aren't buying right now. So you won't be disappointed. We've got also grab bags or swag bags, 2 banquet dinners. So it just gets better and better. So make it happen. Do it.
Do it. Just do it. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on. Always a pleasure. Always a lot of fun.
It was great.
I think we really hit humanism. Look forward to the next one. I will be in Germany again starting this Tuesday, May 2nd to the 16th. I am going on an extravaganza, and I plan on maybe getting a stream in. I don't know, probably not. So don't plan on it. Again, you know how travel is. You always do more than you plan on. So I'm probably going to be busy. But anybody who's in southern Germany, again, I'll be in Stuttgart. So if you are in or around Stuttgart, definitely we can meet up. I plan on making a post over on my Telegram. So go follow Telegram. And if you're in that area, we're going to go catch a beer, eat some food, and talk philosophy. Basically what we do at Montanica.
Yeah.
What'd you
Get
say?
yourself a beer and a schnitzel.
Oh, I haven't had a schnickel. I've never been to Europe, so it's my first time.
Really?
We'll go to Thessaloniki too for 4 days, and I'll
wow.
take the tourist cruise around Mount Athos. I don't have enough time to go actually on Mount Athos, and my girlfriend will be with me. So you know how women are not permitted, but I will do the tour, and I think monks come and they kind of bring gifts for people. So that will be there. So anyways, I have a stream. Don't forget tomorrow morning with Jonathan Paggio, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard. So it's early. If you're over like Father Deacon, you're on Mountain Time, that's early. If you're on Pacific Standard Time, we're talking 7 a.m.
earlier.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking.
If you're in Hawaii, then that's late.
Should be a lot of fun. We'll be talking about the beauty of Logos theology. And then my brother, Baselit Analyzer, will be on Sunday night to do a sponsored stream in which we will be deconstructing the Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Wow, nice.
So don't miss that. That's going to be a lot of fun. So I will see you all tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. As always, until next time, God bless.
God bless.